Hello, my name is Elvira Kalmár, and my guest today is Simone Cicero, and we are going to talk about challenges for HR now and in the future, about platform-based organizations and what is the role in platform-based organizations. Simone, thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Very welcome. I'm looking forward to engage with your questions and the conversation.
Thank you. And maybe we start right at the beginning about platform-based organizations. How do you define what is a platform-based organization? And how is that different from kind of the everyday organizations we know are working?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm also not a very big fan in general of taxonomies or just coming up with words and calling things in certain ways. But because I believe that the question is not really in the organization. No? The question is more structural, and it's about, it's not about a platform organization, or maybe more about a platform age. So it's essentially I would say an organization that is able to thrive in this technologically pervaded and low transaction cost economy that we built. So usually we had formal organizations like industrial organizations that we used to call, as we used to call them, but maybe we can just call them bureaucracies that are optimized for an age of high transaction cost and low technological society. And now in just 20 years, everything exploded and in our hands. And now we live into this hyper-technological, hyper-connected and low transaction cost society. And now we need a different organization to thrive with that. On top of that, you can add that as a function, or as I say, as an effect of this interconnectivity that we live, we have generated the massive change, massive amounts of also of risks in society. And so we deal with a society that is much more unpredictable than it was like 20 or just 10 years ago. And so this is the platform organization. It's an organization that is capable of thriving in uncertainty, change, hyperconnectivity, a low transaction cost, and essentially is able to thrive in this age of networks that we are living.
So sounds like this is somehow the answer or the opportunity for companies to think about how they can utilize maybe at least a little bit of becoming a platform-based organization or even driving to this direction, because you're saying technology is enabling us and there are so much uncertainty and change around all of us at the moment that this might be something to look out for. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's an imperative. Really, it's just just being able to connect with the times we're living, and not just hide yourself behind the curtain and faking that the world is the same we had 20 years ago, which is not. So it's really about embracing this new world and trying to become protagonists of this new work for organizations.
Could you maybe tell a few examples of a platform-based organization? So when our audience is listening to it, what should they think about, or how should they imagine these organizations look like?
Right. So I think it's really a matter of stages. No? So we were pretty used, 10 years ago, we started to see this new wave of organizations. Everybody started to call them platforms and marketplaces like Airbnb, Uber, or before them you had Amazon or eBay and Google, Facebook, and now you have, in a process of multiplication of these platform marketplaces, now you have even more specific vertical marketplaces, like probably 5 years ago you had one marketplace for financial services, and now you have thousands of marketplaces, hundreds at least. One is for financial services in agriculture, for example, or financial services in professional services, in professional business. So we have seen this kind of fragmentation of these marketplaces, and now they are happening, popping up everywhere. And now you have a marketplace for photographer, for dog walking. You have a marketplace for this and that, for even for freight. You kind of have this Freightos company that has created a marketplace to sell containers, all over the place. So as some people that I've been talking to lately, but even Rita McGrath, in an interview a few months ago, she said, we were used to have places where you had a firm, and now you're going to have a marketplace because with plummeting transaction cost, there is no more a reason to have a structured firm. You just need someone that is able to architect and organize these markets. And so these are the most obvious examples, like these giants. But what we are seeing in a kind of very much clear application of the Conway law or even Ashby law, we are seeing that organizations that really wants to cope with these markets, a market made of infinite marketplaces, needs to become a marketplace on its own. So it needs to become a mirror of society to some extent. And so we have now these examples which are much more ambitious and much more organizationally mature, like Hire that everybody's talking about. So this idea of network marketplace-based organizations, when you have an organization that is essentially powered by individuals or teams that are very much more entrepreneurial than usual, and it has some internal structures that support these entrepreneurs to go and explore. So, for example, it can provide services like legal or IT or HR as a support service to these independent teams that create new businesses and expand these new businesses that on their own turn are probably marketplaces. So we're kind of seeing this fractal marketplace, both in the market, in the organization, and so on. So those could be some of the examples.
As I'm listening to you, I kind of see this kind of scale in front of my eyes when, especially thinking and talking with the HR hat on me, that hey, we just sort of sent everybody home officing, which was a huge step in the non-production companies. And now we're just befriending with the idea is that work is not a workplace anymore. And it sounds like the platform-based organizations are already far at the other extreme on this scale, few steps ahead, where they say, hey, and with all this digital capability, actually your market is anymore not where you are, but the whole globe could be your market. And of course, as we are talking from the HR point of view, it's becoming a very interesting question for me also, and the whole globe and its popularity can become your potential employee or contributor market as well. So this takes me to my next question, because you see organizations that are already working like this, or you're working with them who are transitioning into this direction. How do you see, how is the role of HR in this transitioning? And what is the role of HR, if there is any? And I know there is, so that's the good news, even in a company like HR.
Well,
so what should we prepare ourselves for? Basically, that's my question.
Well, I think there are two major layers. So I think we said that in the preparation chat a little bit. So it's when organizations starts to be made of entrepreneurs, it's much more complex to attract and convince entrepreneurs to operate inside the organization instead of just go out on their own. It's much more easy, as we said before, it's much easier to hire a bureaucrat instead of hiring an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs can create value and execute on their own. So the big question for HR in general, I think, for organizations of the 21st century is how do you make the case for entrepreneurs and talents to be part of your organization? What does it mean? What are the impacts on the mission, for example, on the purpose? How do you create a purpose? How do you create the incentives in terms of, for example, reaping the benefits of creating a new business, a new product, or a new solution that can generate possibly, exponential returns. So the big question is, for example, for HR, how do you play with ownership? How do you play with stakeholdership? Shareholdership? How do you play with freedom? And how do you play with these elements that create the incentives for an entrepreneur, not for a bureaucrat, to become part of your organization? Then, of course, you also spoke about this idea of global markets and this idea of remote work. And this is a massive challenge, because global labor markets and remote work, it's a kind of transforming the organization from the outside. So we were pretty much used that our organization were transformed by the will of visionary leaders, and now in a moment, I don't want to say that they actually are the only thing that transform, but we are used to organization transforming by the will of the leadership, for example, and say, okay, we need to go this direction. For example, what Bezos did with Amazon 20 years ago, and say, we guys work this way. We have units, we have API integration between teams, and this transformed Amazon into the giant that is today. But now what we are seeing is that the conditions are changing in society as an effect of a massive pandemic. So it's a risk factor that is expressing itself and generating the need to work remotely. And the question is, what are the impacts of these changes in how we organize our teams and how we organize our organization? What does it mean for the purpose and the meaning of the work of our employees? And finally, another point I think it really needs to be on the table of HR and in general organizations is, how do you redraw a new human development thesis? Because what we are seeing in the last decades, it's a human development thesis that, to quote my big friend Indy Joe, has stalled. So you kind of treat people as bad robots, as Indy says. And the big question is, how do you leverage the real infinite potential that is essentially present in every human? So this is the key question. We really need to redraw the basis of this story if we want to create the organization of the 21st century, I believe.
Yeah, and it sounds a little bit futuristic. So help me and help us with a little bit more concrete examples. So let's take HR. Okay, they are big. If I remember well, over 80,000 people. Are they employed? So are these people employees at HR?
Yeah, in the case of
or
HR,
are they employed in those small units,
right,
business units that they are creating? So how's that, for example?
Well, for Hire, which is a rather specific example, being a Chinese company, so with labor laws that most of us, I don't think, know very well. But I can tell that Hire is based on basic income that is guaranteed to all the employees, but most of their salaries is based on their micro enterprises reaching the objectives that they have been negotiating with their company, their organization, at the moment in which the organization invests in the micro enterprise creation. So you go to the organization and say, I want to create a micro enterprise that does this or that. And then the organization will fund you partially, also yourself. You need to self-found to some extent. And so much of the salary that you perceive is going to be based on the outputs that your micro enterprise has in terms of market. And also it's going to be based on your performance as reviewed by other players in some even more systemic contracts that these micro enterprises create between each other to bring new propositions on the market. So you don't just have one micro enterprise, you also have maybe 10 of them that put efforts together to bring a new product on the market. And at the moment of writing this contract that they have called the ecosystem micro community contract, they actually negotiate even more potential impacts on the salaries of the participants. So it's really a dynamic structure, and I would say that really a little part of your stipend is based on some kind of predefined basic income.
Yeah, which is a very different system than, for example, the hay system, and salaries connected to your position and kind of burnt in upfront or forever. Yeah, depending on your position. I also remember when you were talking about hair that you talked about the role of HR in recruitment, because of course one could wonder, then are these micro enterprises recruiting people for themselves, or what happens when one of them sort of fulfilled its purpose and dissolves? So what's happening, and what's the role of HR in that case?
Well, in that case, the HR in hire frequently plays a very different role. So it's not just hiring people, but it's also, and for example, when they hire people, normally they get some kind of percentage of the value that these people generate when actually they work in the micro enterprise. So they have some. They
are themselves a micro enterprise as well.
Right.
Like a headhunting company inside a company, yeah?
Indeed, they are the so-called shared service platform in hire, which is essentially representing legal, finance, IT, and HR, is also made of micro enterprises. And normally these micro enterprises inside the functional structure like HR, they are divided by their divisional or functional roles. So for example, you can have a micro enterprise that hires people, and another micro enterprise is responsible to help entrepreneurs to craft contracts. So to craft, for example, these ecosystemic contracts. So you may have one person one micro enterprise wanting to create a new product and having to motivate 10 other players inside the organization. And so the HR consults and advises this micro entrepreneur to how do you write the contract to attract and generate this web of incentives. So as you can see, also the HR is evolving, embracing new ways to play the role, which are much more about, designing incentive structures and collaboration structures so that we can bring new products on the market. So it's really much more customer facing, much more market oriented.
And much more business oriented themselves as well. I also like the idea what you were mentioning, that they somehow even sometimes build a pool of talents whom they might not need right away. So the idea is not just to fulfill a position that is empty at the moment, but kind of to have a pool of talents who might be people they think would fit into HR, or that they currently not doing anything in the company, but they retain them for a little while and try to reposition them within the company. So it's really doing something. But I mean, I was thinking, why don't why not all companies are doing this, kind of keeping your ex-employees in some sort of pool and maintaining some sort of relationship with them, that when there's a need for them again, that you don't start hunting on the open market, but you reach out to those who already know your company, know how you are working, you know how they are working. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, the idea of the talent pool in hire is interesting because as you transition into an organization where you actually work for a micro enterprise and not for the group, then of course you need a place where people end up landing when their micro enterprise fails, for example. It seems 80% of micro enterprises tends to fail, like, similarly to startups. Then you need this kind of space where, and also the role of HR is often that of going and picking these people from, favoring micro enterprises in finding the right talent, which is already part of the group. But if you don't fit with opportunities in several months, then you normally leave the group, in the case of hire, in China at least.
Yeah, and this is China, yeah. Simone, I mean, this is roughly how much time we have to kind of talk about this topic, but I like to ask one kind of last final thought or advice from you to the HR people. What is it that they really should keep an eye on, or maybe even start experimenting with, even if their companies don't transform into a platform-based organization right now, but something that HR could already bring in from this way of thinking or helping companies to move towards this direction?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can point some one idea that I found really fascinating and interesting in the last few weeks and months, and I find it resonating with higher as well. And there is this idea from Peter Koenig, the idea of the sorts. So the idea that you really need to find ways for your employees to be able to express their leadership in creating something that they can be the source of. Mm-hmm. So essentially putting the whole creative capability into creating something new entrepreneurially, and something that it can be only led by them. So it's really about recognizing this idea that we can build collaborative systems, we can build collaborative teams, and we can enhance collaboration. But at the end of the day, if your organization doesn't find a way to get people to express their capability to create and to lead and to be the source of something new, I think you're going to fail in the future, because the future is going to be about creatively engaging with problems, creatively engaging with unknowns. We are entering possibly several decades, hopefully just 2 or 3 decades of very bumpy road in terms of systemic change and system shifts, and environmental crises and political crises, and we really need people that are able to engage creatively and lead, and you need to create this space. Otherwise, if you just have an organization of bureaucratic followers, your organizations won't last much, I believe, in these decades.
And thank you very much for this. And I really like that you're saying that it's creating the space instead of creating a structure, which is, again, a very challenging and a very new role for HR, I think, where there is a lot of potential, as well, as you just said. So thank you very, very much, Simone, for this conversation. You heard Elvira, Kalmár, and Simone Cicero for HR Fest Online. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.